My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at my own brother's wedding, they made me sit in the kitchen between trays of chicken and waiters. I was wearing my best navy blue dress, looking for my place among the important guests, and when I received the card with my name on it, I walked to the back of the room and found a small, round table against the wall, right next to the door to the kitchen, where the waiters were constantly passing the dishes. There was my place, in the kitchen of the event that I had organized for 2 weeks, choosing every flower, every detail, every moment of that perfect party. But they didn't even know it was my company. When I stepped up on that stage and took the microphone in front of 150 high society guests, no one was prepared for what happened next. 5 years ago, I built something I should be proud of: Mitchell and Rodriguez Events, a wedding planning company that has become a staple in Asheville, North Carolina. I should be proud, but to my family, I was still just the daughter who played at being an entrepreneur. While my brother Robert was shining as a successful lawyer, I was treated as if I had chosen an expensive hobby over a real career. My mother, Linda, always ended our introductions with a forced smile. "Wow, Sarah, always a dreamer." As if dreaming were a character flaw. Dad would simply change the subject when someone asked about my work. It was easier to talk about his son, a lawyer, than about his daughter, who did party. The family dynamics had crystallized over the years like ice that never melts. Robert was the golden one, the one who followed the expected path: law school, his own office, a house in an upscale neighborhood, a high society bride. I was the odd one out, the one who complicated the simple things. During Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the conversations revolved around his achievements, his important cases, his influential clients. When it was my turn to speak, my mother would sigh softly and ask if I wasn't thinking about settling down and finding a more stable job, as if stability was synonymous with happiness, as if my success was a rebellious phase that would soon pass. I bit back the words I wanted to shout and smiled politely, pretending it didn't hurt to be treated like an irresponsible teenager at 32. When Robert got engaged to Jessica Parker, the daughter of one of the most traditional families in the region, I knew it would be the event of the century. Jessica was everything my family admired: refined, well-mannered, and the heiress of a fortune built over generations. During the engagement dinner, I heard my mother whisper to an aunt, "Finally, a daughter-in-law who was worthy of her." The phrase cut through me like a sharp blade, not because I wanted to be the perfect daughter-in-law, but because it made it clear that I would never measure up to anything in her eyes. I watched Jessica accept the compliments with effortless elegance, talking about the importance of a well-planned and memorable wedding. Quietly, a part of me hoped that they would ask me to plan it. It would be my chance to show what I was capable of, to finally be seen for
Marcus
my
Rodriguez, my business partner and best friend, walked into my office with a smile he couldn't hide. "Sarah, you have to see this," he said, tossing a contract on my desk. The letterhead read Mitchell and Rodriguez Events, and below it were the names of the bride and groom, Robert Mitchell and Jessica Parker. My heart skipped a beat. They had hired my company without knowing it was mine. Marcus noticed my expression and sat down in the chair across from me. "Did you know that?" he asked. I shook my head, still processing the cruel irony of the situation. My own family had sought my services, but they didn't know I was mine. It was like I was good enough to be hired, but not good enough to be recognized. I immediately recognized my mother's handwriting on the contract form. She had seen our ad in the local paper, the one that had cost a fortune to publish but was finally paying off. The Mitchell name in the company name must have caught her eye, making her assume we were a traditional, trustworthy company. What a painful irony. My own last name was my credential, but my person was not. I sat in silence for long minutes, feeling a mixture of anger and something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Marcus broke the silence. "Will you accept?" The question echoed around the office like a challenge. Of course I would accept. not just for the money, which would be substantial, but because I would finally have a chance to prove myself. Maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. For 2 intense weeks, I coordinated every detail of what would be Asheville's most elegant wedding that year. Imported flowers, a string quartet, a menu by a renowned chef, and decor that would transform Riverside Gardens into a fairy tale setting. Jessica called almost every day with new demands, always polite, but treating me with the professional distance reserved for service providers. "I need the roses to be exactly this shade of antique pink," she would say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She never asked my full name, never showed any curiosity about who I was beyond the voice on the phone. To her, I was just another competent employee, invisible like all the others who made her life run smoothly. And maybe that was exactly what I had always been to my family, invisible, even when I was right in front of them. 3 days before the wedding, my phone rang during dinner. It was Robert, excited and anxious. "Sarah, you're coming on Saturday, right? It's at Riverside Gardens at 4 o'clock. Jessica's nervous, but everything will be perfect." His voice carried a genuine happiness that made me smile involuntarily. "Of course I'll be there," I replied, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. I wouldn't miss it for the world. He laughed on the other end of the line. "Great! I can't wait for you to see the place. It's beautiful. You'll love it." If he only knew that I already knew every inch of that place, that I had spent hours planning every detail, that his favorite flowers were already being carefully arranged. But he didn't know, and I didn't tell him. Something was stopping me from revealing it, as if I wanted to save that surprise for a special
Marcus found me in the office working on the last details. The tables were mapped out, the staff was on, every hour was timed. "Sarah," he said, sitting in the chair across from me with that serious expression I knew so well, "have you told your family we're planning the wedding?" I stopped writing and stared at him. The question hung in the air like a gentle accusation. "No," I finally admitted. "I want to see if they'll just notice what I do for once." Marcus shook his head, worried. "This could go terribly wrong. You know that, right?" I knew, but a stubborn part of me wanted to believe that they would notice my work, that they would recognize my competence, that they would finally see me as the professional I had become. It was a risky gamble with my own heart. I arrived at Riverside Gardens at 2 p.m. on Saturday, 2 hours before the ceremony, wearing my best navy blue dress, the one I saved for special occasions. The place had been transformed exactly as I had planned. The white and pink hydrangeas I had personally picked lined the aisle, the golden lights I had tested 3 times set the perfect romantic tone, and the decor I had designed during sleepless nights was flawless. It was my masterpiece, and they didn't even know it. I walked through the gardens feeling a quiet pride mixed with a growing anxiety. With each detail I recognized, the satin ribbons I had tied, the arrangements I had overseen, the floral arch I had designed, my chest tightened. It was surreal to be there as a guest at the event I had created. A part of me felt like a spy in enemy territory, observing my own work from afar. The first thing I did was find my place among the guests. I headed to the area where Marcus had set up the main tables, the ones reserved for immediate family. My eyes scanned the fancy place cards I had ordered, searching for Sarah Mitchell. She wasn't at the parents' table, or at the important uncle's table, or even at the side tables where cousins and college friends sat. A cold feeling began to creep up my spine, like when you know something is terribly wrong but your mind still refuses to process it. I kept searching, more urgently this time, turning over card after card. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe my name was somewhere I hadn't thought of. But as the minutes passed and my search became more desperate, reality began to take shape in cruel outlines in my mind. It was Marcus who found me standing in the middle of the room, his expression betraying my growing despair. He held a small white card between his fingers, his expression a mix of suppressed anger and genuine pity. "Sarah," he said softly, as if the words were explosives that could hurt me. He held the card out to me. I took it with hands that were beginning to shake slightly. "Sarah Mitchell, table 15.
I stared at him blankly. "Where's table 15?" I asked, my voice coming out weaker than I would have liked. Marcus sighed deeply and pointed toward the back of the room. "Over there," he said simply. My eyes followed the direction of his finger, and what I saw felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Table 15 wasn't a table at all. It was a small, round table that sat 4 people against the back wall, right next to the kitchen door.
It was literally a corner table, the kind that sits at the back of a dining room to accommodate last-minute guests or those the host don't quite know where to put them. There were 4 cards on it. Mine, Aunt Martha, the family eccentric everyone tolerated, Cousin Eddie, the distant cousin who only showed up at weddings, and Mr. Johnson, parents' elderly neighbor. The table was strategically positioned so that we had a perfect view of the kitchen door, where the waiters were constantly passing plates and trays. The noise would be constant, the movement incessant, and we would be completely isolated from the rest of the party. It was as if we had been placed in the service area, invisible to the important guests, but perfectly positioned to observe the work of the staff. The irony cut through me like a blade. I was sitting where I could see my own work being done, but as an outcast, not as the creator. Marcus appeared at my side, his indignation palpable in the air. "Sarah, this is completely absurd. You're organizing this entire party." His voice carried an anger I couldn't yet feel. Everything inside me went numb, as if my brain had decided to suspend emotional processing to protect me from the full impact. I looked around, seeing the elegant guests beginning to arrive, greeting each other with radiant smiles, complimenting the decorations I had created, and here I was, assigned to watch it all from the kitchen table, like a waitress on her lunch break. "You know what's so ironic?" I muttered to Marcus. "From this table, I can oversee the entire service. It's almost like they knew I needed to keep an eye on my own work." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but something in my voice must have alerted him to the fact that a fundamental change was happening inside me. It was at that moment that my mother appeared, radiant in her navy blue dress, coincidentally the same color as mine, greeting the important guests like the proud hostess she had always dreamed of being. She spotted me standing next to table 15, and her face lit up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Sarah, darling, I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried you wouldn't be able to get out of work." She walked toward me with measured steps, as if she were performing for an invisible audience. "Your table is over there in the corner," she said, casually, pointing to table 15 as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I thought you'd be more comfortable there, away from all the hustle and bustle. You've always been more reserved." The word reserved fell out of her mouth like a euphemism for something much worse. I smiled back, feeling something strange happening inside my chest. It wasn't humiliation anymore. It was an icy clarity, almost liberating. "More at ease," she had said. "In the kitchen, at my own event." The words echoed in my mind like a cruel mantra. I thanked her politely, as I always did, as a well-behaved daughter should. My mother smiled with satisfaction and walked away to greet other guests, probably relieved that she had solved the Sarah problem so discreetly and efficiently. Marcus was watching me with an expression of utter disbelief. "Sarah, you can't accept this. This is inhumane." But I was feeling something I had never felt before, a strange, almost supernatural calm. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes and I could finally see the situation with complete clarity. It was no longer about being accepted or acknowledged. It was about understanding, finally, who they really were to me and who they were to me. "Marcus," I said calmly, "you're right. This is inhumane. And that's exactly
During
why
the
it's going to
ceremony,
be."
I stood at the back of the garden, technically supervising the photographers and musicians, but really watching my brother get married at the altar I had decorated, with the flowers I had chosen, under the arch I had designed. The music playing was exactly what Jessica had requested, and what I had commissioned after 3 separate quotes. Every detail I saw was a reminder of my work, my dedication, the hours I had spent making sure everything was perfect. Robert was radiant, Jessica was stunning, and the guests were whispering to each other about how elegant and well-organized the wedding was. "Who organized this?" I heard one lady ask another. "Mitchell and Rodriguez Events," came the reply. "They're excellent, very professional." No one in my family saw me working behind the scenes. To them, I was just Sarah, the troubled daughter who had arrived and been properly seated in the right place, out of sight but present enough to not seem completely left out. After the traditional photos, the guests filed into the ballroom for cocktail hour, that crucial time when people mingle, chat, and set the tone for the rest of the evening. I watched the action with the eyes of a planner. 150 people from Asheville's upper crust, businessmen, local politicians, renowned doctors, influential lawyers, all commenting on the elegance of the event, the quality of the hors d'oeuvres, the beauty of the decor. "Everything is perfect," I heard the mayor say to my father. "You've hired an excellent team." My father replied proudly, "Yes, we did a lot of research. Mitchell and Rodriguez has an impeccable reputation." The irony was so absurd, it was almost comical. My own father was praising my firm without knowing it was mine. I slowly walked over to table 15 and sat down in the seat assigned to me. From there, I had a privileged view of the entire room, and an even more privileged view of the kitchen door, where my team worked tirelessly to ensure that everything ran smoothly. Aunt Martha arrived a few minutes later, complaining in a low voice about how they always put her in those forgotten corners. "At least you have your own company, Sarah," she said, arranging her purse on the floor next to her chair. "All I have is my 12 cats and my soap operas." She had no idea she was sitting at the hostess's table. Cousin Eddie appeared next, greeting everyone with the forced enthusiasm of someone who knows he doesn't really belong there, but insists on showing that he's having a good time. Mr. Johnson was the last to arrive, dragging his right leg slightly and commenting on how the kids of today know how to throw a good party. I sat between them, smiling politely, participating in the trivial conversation, but feeling like an actress playing a role in an absurd play. With each passing moment, the clarity within me intensified. It was when Marcus appeared beside me, pretending to check the table service, that everything crystallized. "Sarah, you're not just standing there. You're the boss of this party," he whispered, leaning over to straighten a glass that didn't need to be straightened. I looked at him, and for the first time in hours, I smiled with complete sincerity. "You're right,
I got up
Marcus.
from table
I am the boss
15
of this
with a
party."
calmness that surprised even myself. There was no anger, no tears, no drama. There was just a crystal clarity about what needed to be done. I walked around the room, watching the guests chatter excitedly, praising every detail of the party I had created. The mayor was gesturing enthusiastically about the impeccable organization. A high society lady was photographing the floral arrangements I had personally chosen, and a group of businessmen were commenting on the class of the event. Each compliment was a blade that cut deeper, not because of the pain, but because of the absurd irony of the situation. They were celebrating my competence while my own family hid me in the kitchen. It was as if I was good enough to create perfection, but not good enough to be seen enjoying it. I walked to the small stage where the microphone I had strategically positioned for the speeches was located. My steps were firm, purposeful, each one bringing me closer to the moment that would change everything forever. "Excuse me," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing through the room with a clarity that cut through all conversation instantly. 150 faces turned toward me, some confused, some curious, all silent. I saw the immediate panic on Robert's face, who clearly didn't understand why his sister was on stage, interrupting his party. Jessica frowned with a look of polite disapproval,
My
as if I
mother,
were an
across the
out-of-line
room,
employee.
stared at me with a mixture of horror and confusion, probably wondering how I had gotten from table 15 to here. Dad had the look on his face as if he were mentally calculating damage control, but I felt nothing but a strange peace, as if I was finally in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. "Good evening," I said, smiling politely at the audience. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, from Mitchell and Rodriguez Events." The silence that followed was absolute. The distant sound of dishes being washed in the kitchen could be heard, ironic considering where I'd just come from. I saw the exact moment the information registered on my family's faces. Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Jessica went pale, her eyes wide as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place in her mind. My mother put her hand to her chest, as if physically struck by the revelation. Dad simply stared at me, his expression quickly changing from confusion to understanding to something that might have been embarrassment if he'd been able to feel it. The guests began to whisper among themselves, some recognizing my name from the business cards, others simply confused by the situation. "I want to thank everyone for coming to this celebration," I continued, keeping my tone professional and friendly. "For 2 weeks, our staff has worked tirelessly to ensure that this evening was perfect for Robert allowing reality to fully sink in. I could see on the faces of the guests the exact moment they realized the situation. The groom's sister was the wedding planner, and from the shocked expressions on the family's faces, they clearly didn't know that. The irony wasn't lost on the sophisticated audience. Some exchanged meaningful glances, others whispered comments that I couldn't fully hear, but whose tone made it clear that they understood the strangeness of the situation. "Unfortunately," I continued, my voice remaining firm and professional, "due to unforeseen contractual issues that have just arisen, Mitchell and Rodriguez Events must cease its services for this event immediately." The sentence came out of my mouth as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if I were announcing that dinner would be served in 15 minutes. But the impact was instantaneous and devastating. The silence deepened even more, if that were possible, as if the air itself had grown thicker. Robert was the first to react, coming out of his initial trance and walking quickly towards me, his steps betraying his growing desperation. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he asked loudly, no longer caring about the audience. His voice carried a mixture of panic, confusion, and pleading. Jessica remained where she was, but her expression had changed completely. The mask of calm elegance had fallen, revealing something close to horror. My mother began to move towards us, probably calculating how to minimize what she already perceived to be an imminent social disaster. But I did not take my eyes off Robert. "We appreciate everyone's understanding," I said into the microphone, completely ignoring his question. "Our team will begin collecting the equipment immediately. Have a good night." I turned off the microphone with a soft click, but it sounded like a gunshot in the absolute silence of the room. The party was over, and everyone knew it. "Marcus," I called quietly, knowing he was watching from somewhere. He appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting for this moment since we arrived. His expression was a mixture of awe and concern, but when our eyes met, he knew there was no turning back. I gave him a small nod and he immediately radioed our team. Within minutes, our professional, well-trained staff began moving with the quiet efficiency I had demanded for years. The buffet was dismantled with surgical precision, the decorative lights were turned off one by one, the sound equipment was disconnected, and the floral arrangements were carefully collected. 150 guests watched in absolute silence as the party disappeared around them, as if it were a magic trick in reverse. Some tried to leave discreetly, others remained transfixed by the unprecedented situation, but everyone understood that they were witnessing
Robert
something
ran toward me,
extraordinary,
now in a
and
full-blown
embarrassing.
panic.
"Sarah, for the love of God, what are you doing? You're ruining my wedding." His voice had risen a few octaves, and he was gesturing wildly, as if he could somehow reverse the situation with his gestures. Jessica finally moved, approaching us with stiff steps, her elegance transformed into something close to restrained fury. The nearby guests pretended not to hear, but it was obvious that every word was being absorbed and would be repeated in Asheville's social circles for years to come. I looked at Robert with the same calm I had maintained since I had first stepped onto the stage. There was no anger in my voice, no accusation, just a simple, devastating statement. "I didn't ruin anything, Robert. I just walked out of the kitchen." The words came out of my mouth like a final sentence, carrying all the weight of years of humiliation, condensed into one perfect sentence. He stared at me as if I were a stranger, as if he couldn't quite connect the sister he knew with the woman standing before him. It was at that moment that my mother came to us, and for the first time in years, I saw real fear in her eyes. It wasn't fear for me, but fear for the social consequences of what was happening. She looked around, clearly calculating how many important people were witnessing what she already realized was a monumental social disaster. "Sarah," she said, trying to keep her voice low but firm, "don't do this. We can talk. We can work through any misunderstandings." The word misunderstanding echoed in the air like a cruel joke. She was still trying to minimize it, still trying to control the narrative, still believing she could manipulate me, as she always did. But I smiled. Not a bitter or vengeful smile, just a final, sad smile. "Mom," I said quietly, "you put me at the kitchen table at the event I organized. There is no misunderstanding. There is only the truth." The words came out of my mouth like a final sentence, carrying all the weight of years of humiliation, condensed into one perfect sentence. He stared at me as if I were a stranger, as if he couldn't quite connect the sister he knew with the woman standing before him. As our team finished gathering up the last of the equipment, I watched the room transform. What had been a stunning ballroom was now just an empty space with empty tables and awkward guests who didn't know whether to stay or leave. Some had already begun to quietly leave, muttering to one another about the unusual situation. Others stood by as if they were bystanders at an accident, too shocked to look away. Jessica finally snapped. "This is unacceptable. You can't just cancel our wedding." Her voice had lost all of its cultivated elegance, revealing the spoiled young woman behind the sophisticated facade. I looked at her with a calmness that must have been more unnerving than any shouting. "I didn't cancel your wedding, Jessica. You had a beautiful wedding. I just canceled my services. The wedding itself isn't mine. It's yours. But the party? Well, the party was my responsibility, and I chose to end it." The impeccable logic of my answer left her at a loss for arguments, and she
Marcus
stared at me as
appeared
if
at
I
my
were an
side,
alien
carrying my
creature.
purse and car keys. "Everything's ready," he said simply. Our team had worked with an efficiency that filled me with pride. In less than 30 minutes, we had completely dismantled an event that had taken 2 weeks to plan. The waiters had cleared the plates, the chef had packed the food, the technicians had brought in the sound equipment, and the florists had carefully removed each arrangement. What was left was an empty ballroom, 150 confused guests, and a family that had finally come to understand who I really was. I walked toward the exit, feeling all eyes on me. Some guests tried to stop me with polite questions, others simply watched me pass by, as if I were an apparition. Before I reached the door, I turned one last time to look around the room. Robert was standing in the middle of the empty space, and Jessica at his side, both of them looking lost. My mother was trying to explain something to a group of important guests. Dad had disappeared, probably trying to calculate the damage to the family's reputation. When we pulled into the parking lot, Marcus finally broke the silence. We sat in the car, but he didn't start the engine right away. "How do you feel?" he asked, watching me carefully. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to identify what I was feeling. It wasn't vengeful satisfaction. That would have been too small for what had just happened. It wasn't anger. The anger had been transformed into something much more powerful during those weeks of unconscious preparation. It wasn't sadness. The sadness was what I felt when I was still waiting to be accepted. What I felt was something completely new. Freedom. I finally said, opening my eyes and looking out the windshield at the lights of Asheville. For the first time in 32 years, I feel completely free. Marcus smiled and started the engine. As we drove away from Riverside Gardens, I could see through the windows of the ballroom as the guests still tried to come to terms with what had happened. Some were leaving, others were chatting in small groups, but everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary.
Marcus and I were married the following year, a small, intimate ceremony we hosted ourselves, with the people who truly loved us. We moved to Charlotte, where our business grew beyond my wildest dreams. We planned events for the entire region, and our reputation was built not just on expertise, but on integrity. The story of the canceled wedding has become legend in Asheville's social circles, a tale told in hushed tones about the planner who canceled her own family event because they put her at the kitchen table. Some tell it as a lesson in humility, others as a demonstration of girl power, but I know it's simply the story of a woman who finally understood her own worth. My family still invites me to family gatherings. Robert and Jessica divorced 2 years later. Apparently, marriages that begin with public embarrassment don't last long. My mother still tries to rewrite the story on occasion, but now she treats me with a respect she never had before. Not because she loves me anymore, but because she finally understands that I have power of my own. Dad talks to me about business now, asking for advice on his company events. It's funny how respect appears when you stop begging for it and simply demand it through your actions. Today, when I tell Marcus this story during our nightly walks, he always asks if I regret it. It's a fair question. After all, I publicly destroyed my own brother's wedding. But the answer always comes easily. No, I don't. I didn't cancel out of revenge, though I understand why it might seem that way. I canceled out of dignity. They put me in the kitchen of my own party, and I just showed them who was really in charge of the event. I now understand that the problem was never that I wasn't good enough for my family. The problem was that they never had eyes to see who I really was. Sometimes you have to cancel the party so people realize that you were the only thing keeping it going. And sometimes the best answer to someone who makes you invisible is to simply disappear, taking everything you've created with you. I know now. Dignity isn't something you ask for, it's something you simply possess, defend, and never allow to be questioned again. And if that means leaving some people in the dark, so be it. After all, they've left you in the kitchen for a long time.